It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, Glenn Phillips, who is the Executive Director of Golden Gate Audubon. Glenn is a lifelong environmental educator and conservationist. He was actually raised here in the Bay Area in Livermore, and he got his start in environmental education by sharing his collection of reptiles and amphibians with local kindergarten classes when he was just in 2nd grade, which is amazing. Glenn has master's degrees in urban sustainability and science education, and he has spent many years in New York, where he was the executive director of New York City Audubon, as well as the vice president for education at Prospect Park. While at NYC Audubon, Glenn helped grow the membership base, expanded their programming across the city, and he directed the publication of the country's first bird-safe building guidelines. And that is a near and dear issue to my heart, having studied bird building collisions for my master's. So we are very excited that Glenn is back here in the Bay Area and that he is doing this talk for us. So Glenn, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and I'll have you take it away.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. This evening, it's my pleasure to talk with you all about the Christmas bird count. What is the Christmas bird count? Where does it come from? And what does it tell us about birds? Again, I'm the executive director at Golden Gate Audubon. For those of you not familiar with Golden Gate Audubon, we are I think we are actually the oldest Audubon affiliated organization in California. We were founded in 1917 as the Audubon Society of the Pacific. And since then we have been working to protect birds across the state, but primarily in the Bay Area. And we've worked on projects from the Crissy Field Lagoon to Mona Lake. We're so the active appellants in the ongoing lawsuits against the county of Alameda in the with the Altamont Pass wind resource area and all the deaths those turbines are causing. We have a long-standing education program in urban schools in our area, working in San Francisco, Richmond, and Oakland mostly. And we also offer hundreds of free field trips a year. So please check out our website and come join us if you haven't already. Christmas bird count is entering, this is our 121st year of the Christmas bird count. It was founded in 1900. The Christmas bird count came about because there was a tradition, well, there was primarily European tradition, but had spread to North America of this thing called a Christmas side hunt. And so the idea was, this was sort of a Christmas side hunt was a practice of upper class families gathered, for the Christmas holiday. And so the men would all be sent out of the house to go to stage a competitive hunt. And you really, in a Christmas side hunt, you shot whatever you could. It didn't matter if you were planned to eat it or not. The goal wasn't to bag your dinner. The goal was to just prove your prowess as a hunter. And so they shot whatever they could see, and whoever got the most won the event. The British, although they were long proponents of this project, they were the first to ban it in 1831. But literally, they prohibited hunting birds on Christmas Day. They didn't stop hunting birds, but Christmas Day you weren't allowed. So Christmas side hunts were over in 1831. Right. So Christmas side hunts, although this was sort of the genesis of the idea of the original Christmas bird count. It wasn't really the issue. The Christmas bird count, the Christmas side hunt was, although it was sort of wanton and wasteful and appalling, it wasn't causing any significant damage to bird populations. But at that same time, there were things that were, and among them was market hunting. So here's a photograph. This is from the early 20th century. It's actually from the state of Oregon. and those are sandhill cranes. Market hunters, so they were hunting birds in large numbers and shipping them off to market where they were eaten. And this was a source of revenue for local people living in the countryside. It was a source of protein for growing urban markets that needed game birds as a source of protein. It was a cheap source. So this was both sort of valuable for the hunters, but also sort of a valuable resource for urban folks as well. The problem is that there were no controls on this market hunting. So there were no rules about how many you could shoot. And recently there had been invented some new hunting technologies, basically machine guns, that allowed a small number of people to kill hundreds of birds in a very short amount of time. And so the populations of a lot of larger birds especially were plummeting. And of course, at this same time, and one of the other pressures on wild birds was the millinery trade, so for ladies' hats using feathers. So by 1900, it was clear that if we kept going the way that we had been, we were in trouble. Our birds were not going to be there anymore. So at the time, Frank Chapman was I was about to say professor, but he was a curator, I think that's the right word, a curator of ornithology at the American Museum of Natural History in New York. And he was also the publisher of the first magazine about birds, Bird Lore, and the founder of the very first Audubon Society. Now his Audubon Society never made it. This wasn't the one that became the National Audubon Society that we know today. But he was an early proponent of this movement to conserve birds that was sort of connected to the name of the painter John James Audubon. And Frank was the one who had the idea in 1900 that instead of doing a Christmas side hunt, let's do a Christmas side count, and we'll go out and count birds. And so in 1900, Chapman and 26 of his friends went out in 25 locations across North America to count birds. The nearest count to where we are today was in Pacific Grove. That was the only West Coast count. Pueblo, Colorado. There were a lot of counts in the Philadelphia area. So I guess it's sort of there's of course a Central Park count in New York City. I guess this tells you really more about like who Frank Chapman's friends were and where they lived, who he was able to convince. They saw about 100 species and a few thousand birds. But this in 1900 was the start. So now 121 years later, here's a map of the Christmas count circles in North America. There are over 2,000 active circles today. When you look at it from this scale, it looks like the whole country is covered and then some. It's not quite as good as that. Let's zoom in a little bit here. Here's the Bay Area. Here are our count circles from the Bay Area. And you see that I mean, there's pretty decent coverage, although the coverage is sort of more concentrated in sort of urban places. So it's not sort of uniform, right? So the count circles are formed when a group of people decide they want to do it, and the count period runs from December 15th until January 3rd, I believe. Maybe it's the 5th. I forgot the ending date. And so every year, groups go out and into these circles to count birds. So as I said, these count circles have been going on since 1900, but although most of them actually are more recent than that, most of the count circles were started in the late 60s, early 70s, sort of stretching into the early 90s. So there are many counts for which we don't have over 100 years of data. There are just a handful. A New York City count. The Oakland count circle is one of the oldest in California. But by and large, most of them are much much younger in age. When they were started, again, it was really a when they were started, it was really a protest movement. Right? This wasn't conceived of as a scientific venture. The idea was to engage people in caring about birds, to come up with an alternative to the side hunt, to raise awareness of bird conservation, to build community and camaraderie. And if you've ever been on a Christmas bird count, you know that after spending a winter day out in the field birding, you're cold and tired. Many count circles have a dinner at the end of the count where they gather everyone together for a soup. Actually, the Oakland Count Circle is actually famous because the soup recipe that we served at the count dinners for many years made it into a cookbook, the recipes for a small planet. It's just about to be reissued I think next year. So the Audubon count soup, Christmas bird count soup, was a vegetarian tomato soup that was served for many years at the Oakland Count Circle. So that was sort of the point, right? This was a fun activity. We got out, we looked at some birds, and that was really sort of the beginning and end of it for many years. In the mid-1980s, a group of scientists at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service were hearing reports that this bird, the American black duck, was in decline. And they didn't have any data to support it, except that hunters were telling them, what's going on with the black ducks? There aren't so many of them around anymore. And they didn't have any way to prove that there was a problem. And so at the Patuxent, what's now the Patuxent Wildlife Center, some scientists there sort of started pouring through Christmas bird count data. And they discovered that the Christmas bird count data supported that conclusion that the populations of this bird were in significant decline. In fact, the numbers have declined by over 80%, 84% since 1966. So it's a huge decline. But they were able to verify that this was happening using Christmas bird count data. It was the first time that any scientist had used data that was collected by amateurs as a tool for understanding population change. And this was a radical new idea. Most scientists, even until relatively recently, would tell you that data collected by amateurs is no good, it's not consistent, and it's not even the same observers from year to year, so how could we possibly use this data for anything? But one of the things that the researchers at Patuxent said was, well, while the individual piece of data, each individual piece of data may be of less quality than a professionally collected piece of data, the sheer volume, we're collecting so much data over such long periods of time that it comes out in the wash. That's their theory. So they tested it again. Here's the Harris's sparrow. Now, if you look at the range map, you can see that this is a bird that breeds in the far northern reaches of Canada. Now, usually for most songbirds, we to map their populations, again, until the late 80s, early 90s, we were using data from the Breeding Bird Survey. So Breeding Bird Survey is another sort of long-term project. I would consider it a citizen science project too, but the Breeding Bird Survey people feel like their protocol is so precise, and that the volunteers who are actually collecting the data, they consider them trained as opposed to Christmas bird counters. And so the Breeding Bird Survey folks, if you've ever participated in it, you drive along the roads and then you stop. So if you look at where that orange is, you will realize that in the far north of Canada, there aren't a lot of roads. So it's really hard to track, using Breeding Bird Survey data, the populations of Harris's sparrow. But look where it winters. It winters in the middle of the United States, in a place where there are lots of Christmas bird count circles. And so those Christmas bird count circles actually turned out to be another tool that we could use to track a species. And so Harris's sparrow, another species in decline. And we know this because we've looked at Christmas bird count data. So there's in the decades since the mid 80s, there has been a lot of progress on understanding how to use Christmas bird count data. And in fact, in the early 2000s, the team at National Audubon who run the Christmas bird count actually looked at the data collection process and created new standards so that not only would it be easier for people to collect the data, it's also easier for scientists to use the data because there's more consistency in how things are reported. And that has made a big difference in the last 20 years of this. This data is even more useful. And in 2009, National Audubon made its first climate and birds report using Christmas bird count data. And that was where they were, in 2009, they documented significant range shifts among hundreds of species in the winter. And that's one of the things about the Christmas bird count, right? It is the one sort of snapshot of the year that's not when birds are on their breeding territories. This is winter time when birds are maybe not totally in their winter ranges because it's Christmas time. It's a little early, but you're getting a picture of what's happening, not when birds are nesting, but when they're using other parts of their life cycle. So the first report was done in 2009. It just looked at range shifts. In 2015, they did an update to that report at which they sort of, in an alarming call, determined that there were a significant number of species that, if things continue the way they are very likely to go extinct. And there was a little bit of pushback from that study. I think that it was particularly alarmist, and I think that it didn't have the same sort of precision that earlier studies had had. And so this was a little loose. It was like sort of, these are birds that are likely to be in trouble. And so last year, well, in 2019, they revised the report and created this survival by degrees report, which I'm sharing with you now. And so this is a report on birds in Alameda County, and they've now, the data has been sort of, they've drilled down in this data to really be able to look at how are ranges changing. And so they can look using climate data, using Christmas bird count data to really precisely locate where birds are and what the conditions are that they need in the wintertime. They can use that data to create this report. So here's a specific example. So here's California quail. As you can see, so the red are places where California quail are currently living, but where they are unlikely to be able to successfully have successful populations with, in this case, 3 degrees of climate, 3 degrees Celsius of temperature change, which we're headed for at the moment. It's a pretty dramatic shift in habitat, but it doesn't mean this bird is going to go extinct. You can see there's still lots of yellow habitat. There's a little bit of blue. The blue is range gained, so it's expected that California quail should be able to move uphill a little bit. But this data is, so again, it's a more complicated data set because it's also looking at sort of predicting the impacts. So they're modeling some climate impacts of 3 degrees of warming and how that will change. But the bird habitat use is based on Christmas bird count data, as well as breeding bird surveys and other tools. But Christmas bird count is a really critical piece of this data. So there were 3 things that were necessary in order for Christmas bird count data to become the central tool that it is today. the first was the development of more sophisticated statistical tools, right? So when in 1980, when I was learning statistics, you had to write it out on long pieces of paper. The calculations were difficult and challenging. Today, there's whole programming languages developed to statistical tools. It is so much easier to do the complicated statistics that you can use these large, cumbersome data sets in a way that we couldn't easily do it, 40 years ago. Accounting for effort was a critical idea that we couldn't just look at the raw numbers, because we know that from year to year the number of participants who are out change, and so if we don't account for effort, then we are comparing apples to oranges. And I'll show you some data in just a minute to illustrate that. And then finally, these long-term data sets are really critical, because a short-term study, might capture just a blip in a population change. But when we can start looking over longer and longer time periods, we really can start to see and measure patterns that you can't tell from short-term studies. There are a few caveats about using Christmas bird count data, though, right? We can think about how a Christmas bird count is operated. We've got a count circle that's centered on some place, and we send out teams. Well, for the most part, people are on foot. They might be in cars, and they're observing during the daytime. And so it's really hard to catch those nocturnal species, crepuscular evening species that are active early morning and late and early evening. And of course, aquatic species, because we don't tend to go out on the water, although I think this year, maybe all 3 of the Christmas bird count circles that Golden Gate Audubon is working with, we may have boats on all 3 of them. But it's hard to, we don't sort of carefully categorize all of the aquatic species. It's just hard. And we certainly wouldn't be doing it offshore, right? There are no offshore studies, so we really don't know what's happening with open with pelagic species. And again, the data tends to be biased towards urban places. If you look at even the original 25, right, every single one of them was in an urban place, just about. I think there was one that was that wasn't. But otherwise, they tend to be focused on urban places. So you don't see the gaps are generally in the more the less developed areas in between these circles. So here's an example. This is some data that I collected. I was interviewed by a reporter for the San Francisco Gate a few weeks ago, and they were asking. They'd said, "Oh, I saw all these crows," and so I said, well, let me look and see, are there more crows in San Francisco than they were? Let's look at the Christmas bird count data. And so you'll see the blue line is the actual numbers observed. And you see it goes up quite dramatically. The numbers, the absolute numbers have increased very dramatically. The red line is our effort adjusted number. So for our effort numbers, we take the number of individual birds that were seen, and we divide it by the person hours, right? So if you count up, if I've got 6 people who are out observing for 4 hours and 3 people who are out observing for 2 hours, we multiply, add it all up, and we're going to divide the total number seen by the number of person hours. And for this chart, I've multiplied that by 100 just so it's in the same, because otherwise it looks like a little red line at the bottom of the graph, because it's a number less, near 1, no matter what. But you can see, so even though the absolute numbers of individual crows is growing up quite dramatically, the effort adjusted, so taking into account the effort that was put into looking for them, it doesn't go up quite as much, but it's still significant. And so this is what we mean about why it's important to count for effort, because if you've got, in 1983, we had about 50 people participating in the San Francisco count circle. And so there were a lot of places we missed. We just didn't look there because we didn't have enough people to cover the full, every inch of the circle. Even today, we don't cover every inch of the circle. There are lots of backyards that we miss. There are lots of smaller parks that we miss. We get the bigger ones, but some of them, I'm section leader for section 10 in the San Francisco count circle this year. That's the area around Heron's Head Park and Candlestick Point State Park. And I know we'll probably have 10 people in Heron's Head, but we'll have one person in Candlestick. So he's going to see different things and different numbers, because he's one person than we will with a group of 10. So these effort numbers sort of capture that difference and allow you to compare year to year in a way that you couldn't. You couldn't compare 50 people looking versus 150 people looking. Here's another one from the San Francisco Christmas bird count. California quail. All right, so the last California quail in the city of San Francisco proper, in Golden Gate Park, was observed in, I think, 2013. It's been almost 10 years since there have been any quail in the city proper. Our number isn't quite as bad as there's still some, because there's a little bit of Mount San Bruno that's still in our count circle. It spills a little bit, so there are still a few, but not many. That last year, not a one, and anywhere. So you can see the decline of this species in San Francisco. When I came back, to California about a year ago, after having lived in New York for 30 years. And one of the first things I said was, gee, I don't see so many quail. What's going on? And, officially the California quail population in the state of California is stable, but it's not stable in San Francisco. Here's quail in the Oakland count circle, which I would also say has been sort of stable for the last 15 years, but is down from historic levels. Here's the Sonoma Valley count circle. It's pretty much stable, right? Not a lot of change here. So this is another tool for looking at population levels. Again, this isn't breeding bird survey. Christmas bird count is it's giving us a winter picture, which is different, and we may get a different result when we look if we look at breeding bird surveys. But the differences are really important. When we look at breeding bird surveys, right, that's going to tell us about how successful birds are in breeding. And right, there are a number of places where problems can come in for bird populations. So it may be that the reproductive rate is low, and that's what the breeding bird survey tells us. Right? It says we're not having a lot of success, or we are having plenty of success in reproduction. So then the next phase is recruitment, right? So we've got reproduction, and then the next level is so birds that, like, are birds surviving into adulthood to reproduce again. Right, that's the second question. And then the third question is, once they reach adulthood and start reproducing again, how long are they living? And those are the three pieces that you really need to understand what's happening with a population. You need to understand, again, so the mortality, the reproductive rate, and the how many birds are making it to reproductive success, because those are the three places where you could have problems. And so the Christmas bird count is really helpful in that long-term look at what's happening outside of breeding. It tells us about the sort of survivorship of adult birds, basically, because although we still observe a lot of juveniles in Christmas bird count, we've moved beyond sort of the early stage of, the hardest time for a young bird is that first period from sort of hatching to fledging. That's when most young birds die. So when they if they fledge, then we have a sort of a drop off in mortality that usually sort of picks up. This is one of the problems with the Christmas bird count, is that usually that there's another drop off sort of in mortality for young of the year that generally happens sort of after December in North America. It's going to happen in sort of January, February, and we don't capture that because it's like if we were designing the Christmas bird count to be the sort of maximally useful in capturing and understanding winter birds, there are a few things we would do. The first of all is we wouldn't use a circle. Right? Circles don't really go back to. I have to go back to this. So I'm very pleased to announce, you may have heard that we were launching a Richmond Count Circle this year. It's our first year, and I'm very proud to announce that National Audubon has accepted it as an official circle. We didn't think they were going to do that so easily. The problem with this circle, as you can see, is that it overlaps with three other circles. And that was one of when they standardized the rules in 2000 or so, that was one of the rules that was established, was that new count circles couldn't overlap with existing count circles. And that's fine in places where there are not a lot of circles. But in a place like the Bay Area, where there are, I believe, 14 or 15 circles, depending on how you count, it's really not possible. And yet there was a big hole in the map of count circles, right here around the city of Richmond and Western Contra Costa County. And why? Well, it's not that there aren't good birds there. There are 3 important bird areas that have been mapped in this count circle. We know there are a lot of interesting birds there. Why was there no Christmas bird count circle there? I mean, the answer is that there wasn't a wealthy enough community here to insist on one. And so, because these were areas that were poor, they have majority populations of people of color. They have large industrial bases. There just weren't, there wasn't enough of a community to start an early count. And by the time they got around to trying, again, it's not so easy, and without support from a larger group, it was just too hard. And there actually have been a couple of attempts over the years to start a Richmond Count Circle. But this year, on January 2nd, we will be counting all the birds in Richmond and the communities surrounding it. I'm very excited about it. I said I'm going to be participating in 3 different count circles, and I should probably participate in the central Contra Costa count as well, since I actually live in the count circle. I just was looking at the map here. I live in part of Lafayette that's closer to Pleasant Hill, and so I'm actually inside my backyard. Maybe I can do a backyard count as part of the central Contra Costa circle. I forgot what I had one more thing to say about this, about circles, which is why I wanted to go forward to see this one with overlaps. Oh well. Well, thank you. I think I've done about perfectly for 15 minutes of questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Glenn. It was really interesting to hear about the history of the count, and congratulations on getting that Richmond circle up. That's really exciting. I'm sure if people want to sign up, they can still do that, and I'll be sure to send a link to do that to everybody who registered.
So we have the San Francisco and Oakland counts, and as many counts will probably have closed their registration period, but that doesn't mean you can't participate. So if you haven't already registered for a count and you're here tonight and you think, oh, maybe it would be fun to give it a try, I strongly encourage you to just reach out to your local chapter and say, hey, I know I missed the deadline, but I'd still like to do it. I know in my section, in section 10 and in San Francisco, I'm still adding people in, and I know that in Richmond as well, we'll still add in people. one of the claims to fame of the Oakland count is it is the longest running count on the West Coast. It's also has for many, many years been the largest count in terms of number of people. We had that until 2 years ago, the Oakland count was had more people in the field than any other count, and was the third, because it can also nowadays you can participate as a backyard bird watcher, right? So if you just want to watch your bird feeder and submit the data, we'll take that too. And so Edmonton has actually been the number one, but 90% of their people are watching feeders in their backyard. That's how they make it to the top. But last year, or 2 years ago, last year we're not counting because there were too many counts, didn't happen the way they should have. But 2 years ago, Victoria, British Columbia beat us out as the largest count circle. They had about 35 more people than we did. So we have to deal with that this year. So I definitely want, if any of you here are around and you're and available and you didn't sign up for the Oakland count, we will definitely take you. Can't let those Canadians beat us out.
Nice. So I guess before we get to Q&A, was there anything else you wanted to add about those? So you were talking about how you would do, if you were designing the Christmas bird count today, it'd be a little bit different, right? And that's the overlapping
circles. That is what I would say. But that was, oops, let me go back up here. Right, this was the issue. It's like, because it's circles, you get overlaps, you get, it's, there are two things. One is it would be squares. So we could grid out, that's the way the Breeding Bird Atlas works, right? The whole country is gridded out with sections. And in that case, you're following roads in them, but still it makes more sense to not have circles. Don't, I mean, hexagons, at least we could fill it out, right? But this we can't. So they're they're a little arbitrary. And then the other piece that we would do if we were doing it over again is we would push it all about 6 weeks later, because that way you would really get birds on their winter range. Mid-December, birds are still moving. That can be a little problem. And as I said, we still capture young of the year that are probably not going to make it through to the breeding period, whereas a little later we'll have fewer of those birds around. So if you're interested in participating in a count, I think I said contact your local chapter. You can actually go, if you just go onto National Audubon's Christmas Bird Count, you can find a directory, and you can find the compiler is what they call the person in charge of the count circle. And so if you go to National Audubon's website, you just search Christmas Bird Count, Christmas Bird Count 2021 map. It'll take you right to the where I generated these maps from, and you can find your compiler, or your local chapter will have that information. Sometimes it's not necessarily about being an expert. You don't have to be an expert. A lot of it is about, getting eyes out to see things, right? My experience going on, for many years, I was the section leader for the southwest corner of the Central Park count. And I would bring, we would have 20, 30 people in my section. Some of them were spectacular birders. Some of them this was their first time out. And sometimes the new birders would find things and say, hey, that looks like something different. And then the expert birder would say, oh, that is something different. So every now and then weird things show up on the Christmas bird count. And so it's great having more eyes means more things get spotted, and you don't necessarily have to know what everything is to help with that. Different counts will start at different times. Some people will start at 5 in the morning and go until 7 or 8 at night. Personally, that's more effort than I'm willing to put into it. So I'm 4 hours or so is about, feel like I'm done. But we'll, different groups do different things. So generally what happens is a count circle gets divided up into sections. and each section will have a section leader, and so that we're not walking over the same paths, and then the section leaders will decide, divide up how they're covering their section. So in my case, we have sort of there are 4 major parks in my section. And so I have one person who's doing 2 of them, and everybody else is doing the other 2. And when we finish at 12, 1 o'clock, whenever we finish with the two main parks that we're covering, then we'll go scatter and check out a few smaller parks that are urban parks that may not have much more than a handful of house finches, but you never know. You never know what you're going to find. I know that there is a rock sandpiper that has been wintering in my section for the last 2 years, and so we're going to see if we see it. We keep our fingers crossed that it's still there. The CBC data is absolutely publicly available. So when you again look at historical, just Google it and you'll find it. And when there are a few tricks to navigating the data. It's the user interface that's available freely to the general public is not super powerful, and so if you try to ask for too much, it will crash. It took me a long time. I was trying to have a chart of all of the California quail data for the whole state of California, and I realized the system could not do it. I had to do it circle by circle, or that was all it could manage. And although to researchers, you can get access to the full data set if you request it, to be able to really robustly work with the data. But those charts that I made, I exported data directly from the user interface and worked with it in Google Sheets. Yeah, the Richmond Circle does not, it's just in the last 5 days that it was made official, so it won't show up on this yet. It's in Golden Gate Audubon's territory, so mostly we spill a little bit over. Even Lafayette is technically in Mount Diablo's territory. So, go to our website. It's all of our circles are on there. Yeah. So this year, at least I don't know. I can't speak for all of the circle. I mean, there are a lot of circles in the Bay Area. The 3 circles that I'm working with, we're not doing count dinners for any of them. San Francisco and Richmond may both do sort of virtual count, where we have a Zoom meeting and we share our data. But one of the things one of the innovations that we started last year in San Francisco, and we'll be doing it all 3 circles this year, is that we now use eBird to collect our Christmas bird count data. Of course, eBird is an even more spectacular citizen science tool. That's why it's important, if you use eBird, make sure you put that effort data in, because when you don't, then no scientist can use it. But when you do, that becomes useful data. Well, I would say it does. That was perfect timing. I didn't even see the question yet, but yes, I mean, it doesn't replace it. We're actually, we're putting the Christmas bird count data directly into eBird this year in our count circles, and the goal is I believe for all count circles to do that eventually. And the reason that that's a good thing is that it makes that data sort of available as part of bigger data sets. And it's also sort of richly adds a set of data from a day that has well-described effort information, because we're consistently doing. So yes, you could, if you do your feeder watch on the day that your circle is doing Christmas bird count, you can submit it. It doesn't directly go, so you'd have to sort of the feeder watch data isn't shared with with Audubon, so it won't add into the Christmas bird count data. But if you live in one of these count circles, contact the compiler. The compiler for the Richmond count circle is Derek Hines, and he is available at, I think it's Richmond CBC at goldengateaudubon.org. And we're in the process of because I'm trying to sort of, I don't know why this is so important to me, but I really can't bear that, Edmonton, Canada has more people in their Christmas bird count than we do. That's just not okay. So I'm really working over, it probably won't happen this year, but by next year, we want a really robust feeder watching as part of the Christmas bird count in the Bay Area as well. So we're going to really be promoting that next year. We will be piloting, I think probably later in the week, there'll be a web form on our website to submit Christmas bird count feeder data. Because it's not that hard to do. So
that's awesome. And then a quick question. Do you know if all the count circles, are they mostly concentrated only in North America?
Well, the bulk of them are in North America, but there are many in Central and South America. It's generally confined to to this hemisphere. I mean, there aren't Christmas bird count doesn't happen in Europe and Africa and Asia. Although it wouldn't surprise me if a count circle had popped up here or there, but Audubon is sort of focusing, because that's our Audubon's mission is focused around the birds of North America, which of course we can't take care of North American birds without taking care of Central and South American birds, because they're the same. So that was actually part of why the Christmas bird count was sort of pushed to extend into Central and South America, because it's helping to collect data on neotropical migrants that are in Central and South America now, like all the gray catbirds. I was in Mexico recently looking for black catbirds, which I didn't see, but I saw lots of gray catbirds, which I knew and loved from New York. But there was one in San Francisco not that long ago. I ran into some Twitchers who were out chasing the gray catbird, and I think it was in the Presidio.
That's awesome. So I think that was the last question that we have right now. Thank you so much, Glenn, for this great talk, very informative, and hopefully spurs more people to join your Oakland count and, beat Canada. Is there anything else you want to share with everybody before we all sign off?
Thank you again for joining us tonight. It's so nice to partner with the San Francisco Bay Bird Observatory. It's an amazing organization. If you haven't made a contribution to them to get that hat, you should, because I'm going to do that right now. It's really an amazing group, and we're so grateful to have them as partners in protecting birds around the Bay.
Awesome. Thank you again so much, Glenn, and thank you for all the work that you and Golden Gate Audubon does. Good luck with everyone's Christmas bird counts. I hope they all go well and smoothly. So again, I'll send out some links so that you can join one near you. And I hope everybody has a great rest of your evening. This is our last event of the year. So, happy holidays. Thanks for joining us this year, and we hope to see you in 2022.